The game we're in is not finding commercial real estate. The game we're in is finding a tenant. The crucial words you use are, we've got a tenant. The game we're in is not finding commercial real estate. The game we're in is finding a tenant. Because if we can find the tenant, look at all the buildings out there. When you've got a tenant with all the vacant commercial space, imagine you've got a law firm that's looking for 10,000 square feet of office space. Do you think you'd find any? Of course, it's vacant. It's 29% vacancy of office space in the country right now. So we're not just going to buy it up because we think it's a good idea or we think cap rates are going to drop. No, we need to find a tenant. That's the crucial thing. That's why for the last year in the Avaya building, we've put effort into finding tenants. Regis in terms of the shared office space, as skiff space, lease it out. I mean, these are hot ways of doing it. The building on my right, your left here, it's completely vacant. Apparently it used to be a CVS call center. There is an early termination penalty fee that they're willing to pay of $4 million. Irrespective of how many dollars a square foot it is, if it's 130 or not, it's a vacant building. All we need is a tenant and we can increase the value of this tremendously. There's just too much of this going on that's being sold for way less than the replacement cost. It's an astounding opportunity. And the last thing we want is in 10 years' time, we look back and say, oh, remember when all those buildings were available? In fact, what I'm going to dig up and put in our little group chat is I shot a video in Sydney, Australia. Everything in Sydney was either for lease or for sale, and I just had videos going on different buildings, hundreds of them, so that everyone thought the market in Sydney was over. And these things are all temporary. If you went to Sydney now and see what they're paying per square meter or per square foot, you would cry because you could get those buildings for next to nothing. I really want you to have that attitude because this is a mid-sized building. It's got lots of parking around. It would make great medical facilities. It's not that far from the airport, anything airport related. Right, the comment is, should you go to the local city or county development council or groups that help foster businesses? Absolutely, we've got to go all stops. The value of finding a tenant for a building like this, an 18 million acquisition where 4 million comes off, you find a tenant here, it's worth 30 or 35. My contention is, if we found a tenant for this, and we buy it for 18 million, but we got the 4 million from the CVS tenant, so it's only costing us 14. With a tenant in place, I think it's worth about 35. And let's say a bank only gives us 50% of that. That's 17 million, and it's only costing us 14 million. Now the equation becomes, how do we carve up a surplus of $3 million amongst 18 of us? Unfortunately, it's a complex calculation. We need a calculator. But can you see how it goes from how do we find the money to take the deal down to how do we spread the surplus around? And that's the magic of buying a building that's vacant when we have a tenant in place. From this event, the main thing you've got to take away is go out and look at more properties, because without looking at them, you won't have an incentive to find a tenant. We're not in the game of acquiring commercial real estate, certainly not if it's empty or vacant. We like vacant real estate because we can find a tenant. So how do you find a tenant? Each situation is specific. I want to remind you of one. With the funeral parlor, it was a matter of calling the other funeral directors. And then there are generic things you can do that you should do all the time. Like have a big canvas banner for lease and a phone number or a website. These are just stock standard things you can do to almost guarantee that you'll get a tenant. We've got many ways of finding a tenant. We can spend a weekend. I've done weekend events just on finding a tenant. But I want to jumpstart it and go to the ultimate, sensational, phenomenal, unbelievable, unimaginable way of finding a tenant. It is so good that you'll have trouble assimilating it. And I learned this in the residential world when I did the 52 homes in 52 weeks in Vegas. Because what would happen is I'd find a home that was in a distressed situation, pre-foreclosure. I'd have them quit claim deed me the home. I wouldn't have to put any money in. I said, I'll pay the mortgage for you and get their credit score up high. So I was in their good books. And then I advertised for a tenant. And I'd run an ad, and usually I'd get 3 or 4 calls a day. And the first one to take it, they would become the tenant. I'd sign the lease, and then the calls kept coming. No, I'm sorry, it's gone. No, it's been rented out already. Some of you have heard this. No, I'm sorry, it's gone. I've taken the ad down already. It's no longer available. And I don't know how many times I did this before I realized I was the biggest fool out there. Because from then on in, I started saying, no, I'm sorry, it's been rented. However, if you're willing to tell me exactly what you're looking for, how many bedrooms, 1-story or 2-story, do you want a pool? Do you specifically not want a pool? Do you want a spa? Do you want this? If you give me all the details of what you're looking for, I might find that property before you do. And if I do find it, may I give you a call? No one ever said, no, you pig, don't call me. No. They always said, yeah, sure. So now, if I had a place for rent, and I got 20 calls and I rented it to one of the 20, I had 19 other potential tenants who gave me a checklist of everything they wanted. And now I could go around town looking for properties in the same sort of distress situation. Pre-foreclosure, they quit claim deeded to me. I've got no money going in. I usually paid off the bank what the bank was owed, and then I'd collect that back as an option fee on the lease option. But now I had a list of 19 potential tenants. And when I found out, well, that one's 2 stories. It doesn't have a pool. It does have the spa. That's Harry and Margaret, whatever. And so are you still looking? Actually, we are. Well, would you go and have a look? I think I found one. They didn't say, well, do you own it? And even if they did, I said, not yet. But if you want it, I'll buy it. And so that is now the trick. If we were to get that and we advertised it for lease and we got more phone calls than we had space to lease out, we're going to collect all those names because now we've got the very thing that we said was the second most important. First you find the building, then you find the tenants to put into it, then you buy the building, right? No, we've got the tenants already. Has the tenant ever said to the broker, is this building for sale? Yeah. Does he have a contract or an option on it? No. Can I buy it directly? Yeah. Has that ever happened? And the answer is no. I used to be so petrified that that would happen. I'd try and obfuscate the fact that I didn't yet own it. I'd do that by either trying to buy an option on it. Can I buy an option for 2 weeks? And usually they'd say, yeah, 50,000. I'd say, no, how about 2,000, you know? But in the end, people, most of them who want to be a tenant in that building, being a tenant is a big commitment financially. They can't buy the building. They don't know how. They don't want to know how. So now I'm just bold and say, listen, I know you're looking for these premises. I found a building that's for sale. I don't own it yet, but I invest in commercial real estate. If you are seriously interested in leasing that, I'll have a crack at buying it. And usually they're grateful. They don't say, oh, I'm going to buy it from under your nose. They just can't do it. It's never happened. Has it happened in the world? I'm sure it has. So the more work you do on a building, the more it might serve you in another building next door, across the road, up the street, around the corner, in the next city, in the next state. You never learn less.